In this video, I tell you about how Games Workshop's newfound success might affect the tabletop wargaming industry. So unless you're living underneath your gaming table down in the basement, and honestly, if you are, you probably brought your cell phone with you anyway, so I would assume you would have heard this by now. But as it turns out, Games Workshop's doing pretty well these days with the new 8th edition of Warhammer 40,000, their kind of big company-running quintessential flagship game. They made big changes to this new edition. There's been basically kind of a slate wiping that has occurred. All the codex books are gone. They're no longer being used. There's now new indexes with new codexes coming soon, which they haven't made a big wipe like that in a long time. But even with all the changes, I've been mainly hearing good things. I'm enjoying it, certainly. I've mentioned it many times here before on the channel, and I've talked about whether or not you might be interested in playing the new 8th edition yourself. And you can see some of those videos up here. Pachow. But the fact of the matter is that I know tons of people, and I keep hearing this from other people that I talk to in the comments and in emails and things like that. All these people who are saying, you know, I haven't played in 3 editions, I haven't played in 2 editions, and I'm coming back. I'm coming back, and I'm building myself an 8th edition army. Now, admittedly, the game has been streamlined, which many people do enjoy, just possibly due to getting busier as people get older or whatever the deal is. There are some people who have said, I don't like this new edition because it's become too dumbed down. But I have to say that at least within my kind of group and the people that I talk to and the people that I talk to that talk to people and sort of the friend of a friend situation, for every one person who says, yeah, I'm not going to play anymore because I don't like what they've done with the rules, I know at least 4 that are coming back, that haven't played in a long time and are actually coming back. So it's most certainly a time of wine and roses over in Nottingham, which is where Games Workshop is located over in the UK, for those of you that are new to the whole thing. And I'm sure things are going great over there. But I started thinking about this just recently myself. What does it mean for the rest of the industry? And I guess what I mean by that is, what does it mean for the other companies that are out there that aren't Games Workshop? So those of us who are wargaming veterans will be able to tell you that Games Workshop for the last maybe 10 years has been not in the greatest of all possible ways. Let's just be nice and say it that way. They've been ignoring the customer base. They've been not having anything to do with social media for the most part. Their production levels were not super high. You were lucky in 40K, let's say, to get maybe 3 new codex books a year, you know. And so if you were a certain army, you might be 2 versions behind in your codex book because they haven't made one in that long. So there were all these different issues that were going on, and all of that because of the new leadership, this new CEO that they've had for about 18 months to 2 years now. All of that kind of stuff seems to be going away, and that's great. But what happened while they were sort of asleep, let's just say that, is that a lot of other companies cropped up. People left, employees of Games Workshop left and started new companies. Companies like Mantic, companies like Warlord. Other people started just completely different concerns and decided, you know what, there's a lot of people out there who are tired of not just Games Workshop, but are tired of big army games. Let's make some skirmish games. So you saw stuff like Malifaux, like Mercs. There's tons of different games out there that have cropped up and started to do really well because there were a lot of people that were frankly disgusted with Games Workshop and their practices of old. Now, a lot of people are really interested in even Age of Sigmar, with the relaunch from going from fantasy to Age of Sigmar. Many fantasy people left, and because it was still kind of the dark ages at Games Workshop. A lot of them went to Malifaux, a lot of them went to Infinity, which is really interesting to me. Just the fact that you went from a game of high fantasy with hundreds of units to now you play super high sci-fi with like 6 units. And it's a very, very completely different sort of situation. And that's really interesting to me. But I'm getting off track. My point is that a lot of these companies were able to crop up and do really well because Games Workshop was sleeping on the job. That's not happening anymore, obviously. I've been talking to local game store owners that are people that I know, friends of mine and things like that, and they said that the new 40K stuff is really moving units. And game players like you and me, we have a finite income. We have a finite budget for our wargaming. So what does that mean for the other companies that now we're not buying from? Now, I'm not saying it's the end of the world. I'm not saying that these companies are going to go out of business, because there are plenty of people who are still just either A, not that interested in moving back into Games Workshop, or maybe they just don't like sci-fi and they prefer steampunk, or they just don't like this type of game and they prefer that type of game. And that's obviously the case. But the fact is that I think that they are going to see some definite drops in sales. You're going to have people, because again, like I said, it's not like people are going to stop playing these other games. They just may be spending their money for a while in the Games Workshop camp instead of spending their money in, say, their historicals or their whatever skirmish steampunk or whatever other stuff that they've been playing for quite some time. So I think that some of those companies are definitely going to see a drop in sales for a while. If they've played their cards right, they won't go out of business. If they've been keeping their boat afloat properly and doing the right accounting and planning for the future, they'll be fine, because this thing is a pendulum. It will swing. Things always have a tendency to swing, whether they even just swing back to the middle for a while and then start speeding up and going back and forth, whatever. But I do think that you will probably hear some things about a couple of different companies, smaller companies that were kind of springing up in the shadow of the sleeping giant that are now having to, kind of blink and look into the light as the giant has woken up and decided to move forward. I just came up with that analogy on the fly. I'm kind of proud of it, frankly. I think it worked out relatively well. However, I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I've said many times before that rising tides raise all ships. Now, granted, some of those ships may not get raised as much as some of it, but admittedly now the analogy is starting to break down. But my point is that some companies that make accessories for games, tokens, wound counters, things like that, companies that make terrain, laser cut, resin, weird injected foam stuff, pre-painted things, those companies will probably definitely see an uptake from all of this, because they're going to look at this and they're going to see all these people jumping back into the hobby. There are plenty of people who stopped playing 40K, let's say, for example, and that meant they stopped playing war games. They still had a closet full of the stuff, or down in their basement or wherever, but they weren't playing anything if they weren't playing 40K. There were plenty of people who decided, you know what, I don't like 40K anymore, let's say, back in, say, 5th or 6th or 7th edition, and they went and found new stuff, which is what propped up and really got, a lot of these other smaller companies up off the ground, which was great. But the fact of the matter is that there's another whole kind of group that we don't think of that just plays 40K. It's the biggest in the industry for a reason, and partially it's because some people think of it as the entire industry. That's all they know of it, and when they decided they didn't want to play it anymore, that meant they went and did something else. They took up video games, they took up fishing, they took up bowling. I don't know. I don't kind of do those sort of surveys and try to figure those things out, but they did something else, and now they're coming back into the industry. If they've been out of the industry for 5 or 6 years, there was very little laser cut MDF when they left. There was very little, cottage industry, homebrew, resin molded, crazy hand painted stuff. There was no 3D printing, that kind of stuff. So all these things that are out there, that have been out there all this time, I think are going to help to get propped up as more gamers actually come back because of the new edition of Warhammer 40,000. So is it completely good for the industry or completely bad for the industry? Well, if you've been watching my videos for long enough, you know the answer is it depends. I think, like I said, some companies that have been out there that have been filling in the cracks in people's gaming diet, some of them are going to see their sales dip because people will be spending their money on filling out their old Chaos Army to get it up to 1,500 points, or completely getting into a new army, or all Primaris all the time, or whatever. But I do think that you're going to see companies out there that are making things for general wargaming, and maybe if they skew them a little sci-fi, maybe if they skew them a little bit gothic sci-fi, you'll see those companies really, really picking up and getting a lot of new products out the door and into people's hands. So I think that if these small companies that have been sort of building up in the time of the sleeping giant, if they're smart, they're going to find new ways to sort of keep themselves relevant. And again, like I said, it's a pendulum. So there will be, a lot of excitement for the new 8th edition, and then eventually people will be like, well, I've been playing that for months and months, and I really want to play some Malifaux now. And so you'll have some of that going on. But I think overall, if we had to sit down, put everything in the columns, red ink, black ink, the whole deal, I still do personally believe that because they're the biggest, it really is best for the industry when they're really firing on all cylinders.